What's going on, you guys? I'm back with another review, and this week we are reviewing EA Sports UFC 6. I'm your host, the Maritime Nerd. Let's get started. So, stepping back into the Octagon never felt so fresh. After a long 3-year wait, UFC makes its Octagon return with some added game modes, and after the disappointing launch of the boxing game Undisputed, it's time for combat sports to make a comeback. Does UFC 6 take home the belt, or does it stay as the number one contender? Let's find out. Now let's talk about the gameplay first. Stand up, the basic punches and kicks feel a bit better this time around as far as impact goes, while what is nice is the combos feel more like a flow rather than a robot. But to make it feel like this, you need to go through the settings and do some adjusting to make this happen. Now there is some cool features though when it comes to the stand up, and there's a really cool slow down feature, which in chemo is the time will slow down and allow you to dodge easier. But this can make the game way too easy, so I turned it off about 2 fights into the game. And a new feature that I did not care for too much is the flow state. It basically makes things slow down and makes you really fast and strong. But I felt like it made the game too arcadey, and I'm looking for a simulation. I only really used this feature twice on my own and when the opponent used theirs or a specific goal required me to use it. But the stand-up does feel nice overall compared to previous games, but you do have to make some adjustments in the settings to make it more enjoyable, or at least the most realistic. Something that is a nice touch this year is that not every fighter feels generic. They have an authenticity to them, like how they really fought in the Octagon. It was a nice touch and something that stands out to make this year's version very unique. Now, the grappling in this game is exactly the same as it was in UFC 5, so there's not much to say here. There's one extra grappling position, which is the cage butterfly, but that's it, so there's not really much to say about this part of the game. And now let's talk about the game modes themselves. There's the fight now. This is your basic choose a fighter and play against a computer or a friend, and you can make your own custom matches, like if you want it to be a stand up and bang fight, or if you want it to be a knockout mode where you have a life bar that like any classic arcade fighting game and fight to the knockout once the health bar is depleted, or you can just have your normal MMA match. And there's also the contract mode. This makes its return. This was a really cool mode where EA will have a list of matches you can complete that week. They will select the fighters for you in the difficulty and the type of matches. These refresh every week, and this is a great way to level up and earn some points. It is something I check on every week and I complete them. There's also the Legacy mode, which is the story mode that they're jumping into this year. Now, this is a story mode that follows the career of Chris Carter from his humble beginnings of having his first fights in the basement of an MMA gym, all the way to highs and lows of the UFC. Now, with this mode, I was surprised at how short it actually is from beginning to the end of this mode. It only took me about 3 hours to complete. And you play as Chris Carter, a wrestler whose dad was also a fighter, and it seems this is brought up a lot, so it feels like he's living in his dad's shadow a lot of the time. But as you go through the story, you can see that Chris is trying to make a name for himself. And at the beginning of the story, you're training with your coach in Danny Lopez, your training partner. And as time goes on, Danny gets jealous of your success and ends up in a barroom brawl, getting you and your coach involved. And the next thing you know, Danny's thrown out of the gym. And that sparks a huge rivalry between Chris and Danny. And as you go through the story, you'll go through the WFA and then eventually get a UFC contract. In between fights, there will be training, and this will play out like the career mode from UFC 5, and then there's not really much of a difference. In between some fights, there will be some cutscenes further developing the story, and in the end, you and Danny end up fighting in the Octagon, and in the end, it's up to you if you want to end that rivalry or keep going. Now, once that fight is done, that's the end of the Legacy mode. It felt too short for what it could have been, and what I think of it, I think the champion mode from Fighting Champion is better, and I must say the writing and storytelling in that Fighting Champion was much better. Once that fight is done, you just play through it as if it's a career mode. Now, speaking of career mode, let's move on to that. The career mode is back, and this is probably my favorite mode in the game. You build your fighter, and you choose your style, and start training, competing in the UFC, and working your way through the ranks, and hope to have that gold belt and BMF belt strapped around your waist, and become the greatest of all time. Now, when you are not in a fight, it's the same as UFC 5. The career mode is not really much to add to this year's edition, except for I wish they had like some new training mini games. Like if you're going to do like a head movement drill, have a maze bag. If you're doing a speed bag drill, have a speed bag there, like mini game, or even bring back the mini game training games from the UFC Undisputed series that THQ had. I initially started the settings on hard, but after about 15 wins in a row, I decided to go a little bit harder with the pro mode and the greatest of all time mode. And then after I started hitting about 25 wins, I kind of started getting a little bored there with it. So because it was just a repetitive cycle, and the only part that was thrilling was the actual fights. But once I did increase the difficulty, I was still winning a lot. But Sean Strickland, that dude tuned me up. And after a while, I would simulate the training because I was getting an A on every mini game pretty much there was. Now the next mode was the Hall of Legends mode. This was the last mode I had played in the game, but it was one of the most fun modes. You basically are your avatar and you're taken through 3 different fighters' careers and heritage. It was really cool, and I enjoyed watching the videos leading up to the fights. It was very cool seeing where these fighters came from and hearing their backstory, and just seeing the uniqueness to their fighting style and seeing them do what they love. And it was absolutely awesome. Now, when you got in the fights, there was 3 fights for each fighter. Each fight had about 2 or 3 goals, and you had to complete them all to get the reward. They were not overly difficult. I think to complete the mode, it only took me about an hour, hour and a half, but I loved it, and I kind of hope they add more as a DLC. Or something like that. I know they probably won't do that, but it would be very cool. Now, overall, UFC 6 is a very good addition. It's not great, but it does add a lot of unique features that will help a lot of newcomers and that they will like, and the veterans are able to turn these features off. So we'll still enjoy the game of those who like the game a lot, the series a lot. Now, the hits feel more impactful. There are some new modes which are cool, but I only feel one of them does enough to make it feel that bit more extra, but it is short-lived, but it is still the best in the franchise, as it is only one of the combat sports games out there. UFC 6 gets a 7 out of 10. Great job, EA Sports. Have a great day. Bye-bye.